I study horses, beauty matched only by their strength. I try and capture a little of that as I move on without your face.
Today we're here at Helgstrand working on Jules for Miss Lindsey O'Keefe. We're going to take a look at his feet as related to the Noble Farriery signature trim and do the measurements and kind of walk through the process. Alright, I pulled Jules' shoes off, hoof tested all 4 feet, no reaction. He does have the very typical normal pattern, the low left front, high right front, high left hind, and low right hind. So this pattern sets us up for most of the other problems that cascade due to that particular set of feet conformation. The biggest thing that we work on as part of the signature trim is making sure that we have sufficient vertical depth and sufficient reduced breakover. So we're going to take those things into account as we trim here. Within our signature trimming philosophy, it's important to know what's normal. So because I know the most normal problem in horseshoeing is trimming too much from the bottom, basically reducing vertical depth, I'm going to start my trim from the top so that we reduce the horizontal length first, and it will help me see how much vertical depth we actually have. Following the shape of the hairline, that's going to be my guide. Shape of the hairline is the most consistent outside marker that changes the least. Jules is very involved. Okay. It's important to measure because if you know what's normal, you can see what's not normal. He's at 3 3/8 inches, which is pretty normal. But from my perspective, right now the dorsal wall is roughly 1/3 of the length from the fetlock to the ground. Just over that, which is also normal. Good. So we have correct shape, correct length. Now we'll look at the bottom. So within the trim methodology, the DP balance, or front to back balance, is more important than the side to side balance because of the way that the front to back balance affects the side to side balance. So I've reduced his length from the top, looks slightly high on the outside, which is a normal pattern for him. I'm going to explore the texture of his sole, so we want to maintain vertical depth. I'm starting with the simple goal of increasing angle on this foot, which is his low foot. So first we'll increase angle, and then we'll worry about medial-lateral balance. I'm paying very close attention to the texture of his sole. It's nice and chalky, so we know we're in good shape, and the measurements correlate that. So we're just around 3 1/4 inches long, which is a normal measurement. Now I've increased angle, decreased breakover. Now we're going to lower that lateral just a little bit. It's most important to maintain vertical depth. That's going to help Jules the most. Alright, let's take some measurements. 5 1/4 wide. First nails in his shoe should be at 2 1/4 inches. Measure perimeter. The perimeter of this shoe should go roughly halfway between the end of the heel and a vertical line, a plumb line from the bulbs to the ground. So we don't want to terminate here at the heel buttress. you want to terminate the shoe right about in this area. And that's going to fit his leg, not just his foot. And that ends up being 15 3/4 inches, which is pretty appropriate for a horse's size. Lastly, angle. This is about 57 degrees. It's a pretty good angle. Now we're working on Jules' right front, which is his high foot, which is the most normal. I always start on the low foot because our simple goals are to work towards symmetry. And symmetry is important because we want them to be able to hold their spine straight, to be able to help ground, be able to help use their hind end. So now that I've got his low foot at a higher angle and the shape of the hairline, I'm going to work on this high foot. The hairline is my guide for my shape. Reducing breakover and maintaining vertical depth. We're at 3 3/8. So we can see it's a much smaller foot, but we have the symmetrical toe lengths. Because it's the high foot, my simple goal will be to bring it into balance with the other foot, which means lowering the angle most likely, but only as much as necessary. All right, so we've got as much symmetry to Jules' front feet as we have been able to on this trim. Here we're working on Jules' low hind foot, which is diagonally opposite of his low front foot, which is the most normal. It's important within the trim to only take away what is actually long. The height of the frog is a good defining landmark of the height of the heels. So here, on Jules' low hind foot, his heels are already below his frog, which means by the trim method, we're not going to trim anything that's already below the frog, which starts at the widest point of his foot. So in order to increase that angle, we can only take away what's actually long, and we have to leave what's already too short. So that means we only trim to the widest point. And only as far as the texture lets us go in the sole. We want to maintain that vertical depth, the most important goal. It takes some training to not trim too much. It's actually a lot harder to trim less than it is to trim more. So you see, I didn't trim anything from these points back. I want to maintain all that height that we already have and let it grow taller if possible. All right, we've got Jules all measured up, trimmed and measured up, and all the measurements are fairly typical, which is a great way to double check the trim. The biggest thing that stands out with Jules is that his hind feet are as big as his front feet, which normally they'd be smaller than the front feet by a ½ inch in diameter. And remember, we're fitting this shoe not to his foot, but to his leg in an effort to actually fit to his spine. That's our whole goal, is to help him hold his spine straight. He's had all the typical patterns, from the hind feet tilting to the left, front feet both high on the outside, which happens in between cycles. It's not necessarily a trimming issue. I'll probably come back and find that again. The other patterns are the high right, the low left, and the opposite reflection in the hind feet. So we trim him up in a way that should be optimum for him. We're going to fit him really big and full. As an example of fitting to the leg, we can't fit to the buttress of the heel, which would actually be on this foot, way forward of his leg, so, and small for his body. So we want to fit actually to about here, just a little forward of the bulbs. And by fitting there, we're giving him a nice big platform to work off of for his big body and his big movement. And that's going to be true of all 4 feet. The only caveat is, because of the difference in stride between a low foot and a high foot, can't fit the high foot as long. They tend to pull that shoe a little easier. So we're going to fit it just slightly shorter than I might like to. Okay, we've got a pretty shape, got nails where they need to be, clips where they need to be, length where it needs to be. It's deceiving because the shoe goes so far past the buttress, but to support his big body, we need it to come roughly to halfway between the buttress and a plumb line from the bulb. So we've accomplished that goal. From this position, the size looks deceivingly big, but when I put it down, we'll go over the whole shoeing at the end. It looks very appropriate underneath his leg. All right, so we've accomplished most of our goals for today. There were simple goals: raising angle, bigger shoe, tip to the lateral, tip the hind end toward the left. You can see where our bigger shoe still comes forward of the bulb, nicely supporting his leg, which therefore supports his back. In theory, I've got his breakover set roughly in line with his pastern without taking away the strength of his dorsal wall by over rasping. So we'll see how he does. Turned out pretty nice.